Good evening. This is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Parrots. Today is the 23rd of November. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving of 2016. This is a Wednesday night, and so we're in the Old Testament. We have a live Bible study, but we're recording it. The last video that I made, and I uploaded it just barely last night, so a few minutes ago, I got the title on it. Sometimes some of you get to it before I do, so you may have gotten just something with the title of a bunch of numbers. Those were videos that were made on Sunday. Last Wednesday, our Old Testament night, I made two videos, and the second one had to do with sodomy. It had to do basically, we had gotten to the part in chapter 18 of Genesis where it talked about sodomy. Actually, the name of the city is Sodom. Did a short video because there was only one purpose of making that video, since I have others on the same topic. The purpose of that video was to show that what had occurred that caused the angels to destroy the city. And I got some comments on it since then. Somebody thought that what had happened in Sodom that God was unhappy with was rape. And I guess if you're reading an older version of the Bible or an older English version of the Bible, it doesn't speak specifically. The Old Testament will say things like, Adam knew his wife Eve and they had a child. You don't meet somebody and get to know them and have a child with them. But that older language sort of erases some of the actual fact from what really happened. So last week we used a number of different versions to show you that they were in fact talking about a homosexual experience. And the reason we made the separate video, I already have said most of what I have to say on the subject. I just wanted to point out that what we read in the 18th and 19th chapter of Genesis was not under law. We tend to think of the Old Testament as being under law and the New Testament as being under grace. Actually, the book of Genesis and part of the book of Exodus is before the law. After Israel is 400 years in captivity and slavery under the Egyptians, God sends Moses to bring them out. When they cross over the Red Sea and into safety, then we hear a period of time when Moses is up on the mountain and receives the law, gets it to the people and sets it in order. At that point, from Mount Sinai until the birth of Christ, or until Calvary, actually, is law. From the time of the death of Christ on Calvary, which occurred at the same moment as ripping the veil in the temple in two, in the Holy of Holies. From then on, we have been under grace. All right, I stopped reading when we got to the part of the angels destroying Sodom. I want to go back and finish reading the scripture, although there's not going to be a whole lot to comment on because it's pretty clear and doesn't require any comments. And then in chapter 9, we get the actual destruction of the city. So let me go back to about where we ended last week. In verse 16, chapter 18 of Genesis. The men got up from there and looked out over Sodom. This is the men that are visiting Abraham. Angels, actually. They believed to be men. And in verse 20, it tells us that they decided they would share with Abraham what was about to happen close to where his son lived. And Adam then said, well, if there were 50 good people there, you certainly would not destroy a whole city just because there were a few bad people. And God said, if there are 50, I will not destroy it. Well, it came down to 45, 40, 30, and down to 10. If there were 10 righteous, I'm going to say God-fearing, God-loving people, the city would not be destroyed. So we know that there were fewer than that because the city was destroyed. Then we come to chapter 19. The two angels enter Sodom, and they are believed by the people in Sodom to be men. Lot, who now lives in the city, we're going to see some things happen tonight that happened to Lot. Not pleasant. When preachers preach a sermon, right now I'm not so much preaching as teaching. But when preachers preach a sermon, you take a historical fact and try to find some information in whatever part of the Bible you're reading that will either encourage people who need to be encouraged or help them live more righteously than what they're living. You try to find some information from the history that will help people with their life today, even though the history might be 3,000, 4,000 years old. Let's look at Lot. We're going to find out some horrible things that happened to Lot. But let's consider some of the things we already know about Lot. Lot and his grandfather and his uncle and his aunt leave Ur. It comes down to Sarah and Abraham and Lot. Both are wealthy. Their wealth is not in the bank. Their wealth is not in property. They are herders. So they have a lot of animals that have to graze on a lot of land. And you can't have somebody with thousands of head of cattle and a friend or relative with thousands of head of cattle. Can't live close together because all this cattle need grazing places. So Abraham tells Lot, we have to separate. I'm wealthy. I have servants that work for me. I have many, many animals, and so do you. Abraham allowed Lot to pick, and Lot picked the best land, in his opinion, that there was. Most people in my day, some people nowadays, high praise, and definitely when I was younger, would defer to their uncle, like their father. You pick I'll take what's left over. First of all, Lot didn't. First of all, a mistake, and I'm just going by the history now. First thing that is not the nicest, best choice he could have made was taking the best for himself. Second, when he picked where he wanted to live, he pitched his tent. Now, see, it's dark now, but if it were daylight, I can just turn like this and I can look across the lake to the forest and way out there, Highway 18, which cuts across the mountains. I'm sure there's a reason they built this house so that when you're in the living room, you can just look like this. If I look like this, I'm looking at a couple of houses out there. Who wants to look at houses? I do this and I see a lovely view. So Lot, first of all, picked a lovely view. He pitched his tent toward Sodom. Well, it turns out Sodom is not that nice of a place. He moves, and last week we talked about he's in the gate of the city. Everything important that happened, if you needed to do business and you needed witnesses, you always did it at the gate of the city because that's where people went to do business. We see this in a lot of the history that takes place in the Old Testament. Lot is now living in the city that he previously viewed from a distance. I've heard a lot of preachers. I just realized that I picked up something that came in the mail, and it talked about Pearl Harbor Day being 75 years ago. I was in the 3rd or 4th grade then. He picked what he thought was the best, and then he looked at a place that I'm sure it did not turn from one kind of a city to another overnight. But he looked at it for a while and then he moved in. But he's still from a good family. And when the angels appear, thinking them to be men, as did the men of the city, also thought they were men, he offers to take them in. And when he finds out that the men are wanting to have a homosexual experience with them, he makes them lesser offers. It happens a number of times in the Bible. In the New Testament, we generally preach sin is sin. God's not happy with it, but sin is sin. Whenever this subject comes up, except for GBL, you know the letters, except for people with that leaning, most people think that some other sin would be preferable, and they offer them a virgin, a lovely woman, as opposed to a homosexual experience. Well, this happened with Lot, and the whole city, old men and young men, I don't know how many women may have been in the city, There may have been a reason that there were this many men. But they tried to force themselves in, and the angels, let me get to the exact verse. Get out of the way, they said. They put pressure on Lot and came up to break down the door. But the angels reached out, brought Lot into the house with them, because I guess he'd stepped outside the door, and shut the door. They, the angels, struck the men who were at the door of the house, both young and old, with a blinding light, so they were unable to find the door. They became blind, couldn't find the door, so what they had planned for the evening was not possible because they were blinded. Then the angel said to Lot, and this is basically where we ended last week, because I went on to talk about the different periods in history. Verse 12, chapter 19. The angel said to Lot, do you have anyone here? A son-in-law, your sons, daughters, anyone else in the city that belongs to you? Get them out of this place, for we're about to destroy this place. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. This wasn't something the angels dreamed up. Lot went out and he spoke to his sons-in-law. Now, I believe they were not sons-in-law yet because they had offered them their virgin daughters. And I think that they were about to become married, but had not. The outcry against his people is great before the Lord has sent us to destroy it. At the crack of dawn, the angels urged Lot, get up, take your wife, your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. So because of the Lord's compassion for him, the men grabbed his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, and they brought him out and led him outside of the city. That would be outside of the wall and the gate of the city. Verse 17, as soon as the angels got them outside, one of them said, run for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop. Run to the mountains or you will be swept away. This is going to be a huge destruction. You don't want to be 15 feet from where it's going on. You want to be miles away. And Lot said, no, Lord, please. Your servant, if your servant has found favor with you. In other words, please, Lord, if I'm a friend. Oops. And you have shown me great kindness by saving my life, but I can't run to the mountains. And the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. And then he thinks of a town that's real small. And he thinks of, nobody lives in that town. But if I could get to that town, I could make do. I'm sure there's some fruit, some vegetables I could eat, spring of water or well of water. If I could get to this town, I could make it. So let me go there. It's a small place, isn't it? So that I could survive. And he said to him, all right, I'll grant your request, and I'll not overthrow the town you mentioned. I will not damage the people in that town. Hurry, run there, for I can't do anything until you get there. He's promised that he will not destroy that town, but you better hurry up and get there. I can't wait forever without destroying the people in Sodom. He overthrew these cities, the entire plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and everything that grew on the ground, plants, everything. And he saw the smoke going up from the land. So it was that God destroyed the cities of the plain. He remembered Abraham and brought Lot out. How many times do our kids get away with stuff because we serve God? Or God is good to somebody we're praying for because we prayed for them. He remembered Abraham and brought him out of the middle of the upheaval, and he overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. So remember, Lot picked the best for himself. He pitched his tent so if he was sitting in the door, he could look at a city that obviously had a reputation. The next thing we know, he's at the city gate, visiting with people. He's still hospitable, still a nice guy. All right. Now, we come to something that jumps from there. Lot, Abraham's nephew, did not want to go, and I see we're being featured, did not want to go to the mountains. Apparently didn't think he could make it that far. Chose to live in this little city. Actually, I'll read it in just a moment. But he and his two daughters were living in a cave. I'll go back and repeat something I said a little bit ago. We, you and I, have our ideas about what we think sin is. Of course, what we do is less sinful than what other people do, right? Is that not correct? Do you see the wrong things that you do as being really, really bad, or not too bad, but the stuff that other people do wrong is bad, but your bad stuff is kind of not too great, not perfect, but who's perfect, right? Is that not our attitude usually? He lives with his two daughters in a cave because they didn't make it to the mountains. They just made it to this tiny, tiny little city. I guarantee it didn't have a wall around it or a gate. So now we're in the 30th verse of the 19th chapter, and we're back to Lot. But we're about to come to two words that you guys that have been with me for many years have heard me say a lot. Cities are frequently named for people. We've got Jamestown, Fredericksville, and in the Bible we have cities that are named after people who founded the cities or who lived in those cities. So now we're still with Lot after the destruction of Sodom. By the way, there was just Lot, his two daughters, his wife, that fled the city. She turned around to see what was going on. Not smart. Oh, I mean, we all want to know what's going on, right? Of course we do. Um, a lot of stuff isn't our business, and we make it our business. She turned around and she turned into a pillar of salt. We don't have it written down that she was told not to, but apparently it wasn't the smartest thing she could have done. Now, Lot's wife is turned into salt. He's got two daughters. They're not married. Everybody thinks about their progeny. Most of us feel that what we didn't accomplish, maybe our kids will. And we can still have a big building in New York with our name on the door or name on the tower. We like to think that we've accomplished a lot. We've done pretty well, but we'd also like to think that maybe our kids can do even better. But hey, if you don't have kids, isn't this Abraham's problem so far? He has a child, but not with Sarah. And the promises that God has made to Abraham have been through the children that Abraham has with Sarah, not the children he has with somebody else. So, verse 30, Lot departed from Zoar, the name of that city, and he lived in the mountains along with his two daughters because he was afraid to live in Zoar. He's afraid of the mountains and then he's afraid of the little town. Kind of scary, isn't he? Here's a man who had so much wealth that he couldn't live anywhere near his uncle because they both had so much cattle, so many sheep, so many goats, that there wasn't enough herding or grass for all of them. They're so wealthy, they've got to live someplace differently. And now, because of his fear and whatever reasons, he's living in a cave with his two daughters. Instead, he and his two daughters lived in a cave. Verse 31, then the firstborn said to the younger, so the oldest said to the other one, our father is old. Well, there's only one way you can have offspring. You can't write a story about it and they materialize. You've got to have a man and a woman to create a child. Our father is old and there is no man in the land. Well, there is no man in that cave other than their father to sleep with, as is the custom of all the land. Men sleep with women, women sleep with men. My friend who drove me today and brought some things upstairs and left, stopped and we were watching the two cages you see behind me. The bottom one has 5 of the last clutch of lovebirds, and the top one has, the female is sitting on 3 eggs now. Now, they don't start counting until they're actually being sat on. They don't start becoming a living being by being laid. They have to be sat on. And sometimes this particular species, I haven't seen it with other kinds of birds I have, but this particular species will wait until they have 2, 3, or maybe 4 babies before they start sitting on them. And my friend looked and she said, oh, look, because with this species, the mother sits on the eggs, and from the moment she's sitting on the eggs, daddy is feeding her. Now, with the cockatiels in the other room, Mama gets off the cage at night and Daddy sits on the cage. And Mama goes and eats and Mama takes a bath, and not this species. She's sitting there, he feeds her, takes care of her. And I said, oh yeah, she's got 3 eggs there. She's sitting there. And he says, well, she's feeding her. Yeah. That's the way this particular species is. Well, getting back here, it's what birds do. There are differences among the different species, but I told her I can get her off the nest if you want to see her off the nest. She said, you can? And I said, yeah. I'll slip a little bit of newspaper in the cage. She will come off the nest. She will take the newspaper and cut it up and make little pieces of newspaper clippings. She puts it in her back tail feathers, walks it over to the cage, and it's nesting material. So I was showing her that's their instinct. I can't tell you why this kind of bird lays 3 eggs before it sits on them. And the father then takes care of her. And the other cockatiels, which are so similar in many ways, don't do it that way. But these girls said this is what men and women do. They sleep together. Our father is old, and there's no man in the land to sleep with us, according to the custom. Come, let us get our father to drink wine. Boy, we had this not too long ago recently, didn't we? Let's get somebody drunk. They don't know what they're doing. Let's get our father to drink wine so we can sleep with him and preserve our father's line. Father is not interested. Lot is not interested in preserving his line and having children bearing his name, but apparently his daughters are. And remember, I told you, in those days, it was a man's world. Many concubines weren't really brought into the house to make a harem, but sometimes because women didn't work, women had no means of making money, and they went from their father's house to their husband's house. Well, let's suppose you have no husband. Somebody must adopt you. Somebody must take you in, because you were with your father until you were with your husband. You couldn't own land, you couldn't work, you couldn't, so you went from the house of one male to another. Now they're saying our dad's getting old. So what's going to happen to us? And they decide to take things into their own hands, get their dad drunk, which they do. First one and then the other. And the firstborn slept with their father, and he didn't know it. I find it difficult to believe, but I understand it's not impossible. The next day, the firstborn tells the younger, and she repeats it. They got him drunk again. Verse 36, both Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son. You know what they named him? A word that when you hear it, you're going to say, oh, that's a city. That's a city right across the Jordan River from Israel. Some of you may even remember that that is a city where Ruth and her husband went to live there because there was a famine in Israel. They had 2 sons. The husband and the 2 sons died. So we have the mother and the 2 daughters-in-law. And the mother decides to go back to Israel, and one of them goes back with her, and her name is Ruth. She marries a man by the name of Boaz, and they have a son. And guess who grandson is? Jesse. Who's Jesse? King David's daddy. Well, the first daughter has a son. She names him Moab. You say weren't they always fighting and at war with Israel? Yep. But look at their heritage. Now, Sarah, who is the half-sister and the wife of Abraham, she's 90 years old and she's barren, and God has promised her a son. But these two girls decide they're going to take matters into their own hands. Well, Sarah did too. Remember, she said to her husband, "Here's my maid. If you have a child with her, the child will be legally mine. So it will be mine by law, and it will be yours by birth." All right. The first one names her son Moab. He is the father of the Moabites today. So from now on in the Old Testament, on Wednesday nights, when we get to Moab, that's who we're talking about. The younger gave birth to a son, and she names him Ben-Ami. Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites. So the Ammonites and the Moabites have always been at war with Abraham's children. And when I say that, I'm speaking of the Jews. Of course, Abraham is also the father of Arabs. Well, now we get to chapter 20, and let me get a little bit of my red water here. Been sipping water all day. Chapter 20. Now we're back to Abraham and Sarah. Remember, Lot is the nephew. His father is Abraham's brother, but he dies before they ever leave back home, just near where the Garden of Eden used to be. So now, this chapter, we were studying Abraham. Then we got Lot and Abraham dividing up because they needed more land. Lot winds up near Sodom and then in Sodom. And then because of the Sodomites and that sin, and they were killed off by angels, Lot runs off, is protected by God to a degree, and is living in a cave with his two daughters. One of them has a son by him named Moab. One of them has a son by him named Ammon, Ammonites. Now we're going back to Abraham, the uncle. Abraham is probably one of the most important persons we can study in the Old Testament. Abraham traveled to a region of Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he lived in Gerar, Abraham said about his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." We have done this before. A little bit of added information. Remember that Sarah and Abraham were half brother, half sister. They had the same father, Terah. but they had different mothers. And the world was not nearly populated. They had had the flood a little while back. There was only one family, Noah and his family. So we don't have a big population. And it's not unusual in these days that you're married to close relatives. So when we get the law, then you can not only not sleep with your mother, but you can't sleep with your father's first wife. There would be no blood relation there, but it would be a matter of respect. So we're back now, one generation back from where we are in the previous chapter. And he's got a gorgeous wife. He wants people to like him, to give him things, to be nice to him. So he doesn't get around to telling people that this gorgeous woman is his wife. He doesn't lie. He says she's my sister. But he doesn't tell the whole truth because she is also a wife. Abimelech, the king, Caesar. And remember, the wealth, people's wealth, was not in how many cars they have, not in how much money in the bank, but how much cattle did they own, how much property did they own, how many kids did they have, how many women did they provide for. Now we say, well, I give to 20 different charities. Those days, if there were 20 women that had no place to live, you could make them your concubines and bring them in. But having done that, they then become very similar to a spouse. The marital privilege is the same. The difference is only what the kids inherit. Okay. Abimelech verse 3, God came to Abimelech in a dream and says, you're about to die because of a woman you've taken in, for she's a married woman. You mean I'm just not taking a poor woman off the street that has nowhere to live, but I have somebody's wife? The Lord would destroy a nation even though it's innocent? Didn't he himself say, he is my brother? And the king says to God, I did this with a clear conscience. I may have done something wrong, but at the time I didn't know it was wrong. I was given false information. Yes. And God said, and we've discussed this before, the language, we even looked it up in a number of different versions in the Bible. This later part makes it very clear. He did not sleep with her. But the fact that she was living there in his home, it could have been possible. It wasn't. In another place where this same story is in the Bible, we don't get as much information and we're not sure. But here we're given the information. God says, I'm telling you the situation so you can rectify it before you do something wrong. I have also kept you from sinning against me, says God to the king. Now return the man's wife. This part right here is a little difficult to take. I'm going to do my best to explain it, but I myself am not going to be 100% happy with the explanation. You guys know me. Return the man his wife, for he is a prophet. Abraham's a prophet. I thought Samuel was the first prophet. Samuel was the first prophet during the history of prophets. But this clearly says Abraham is a man that God chose to use. And he says he will pray for you and you will live. You almost did the wrong thing, but you did it innocently. Give him his wife back and he will pray for you. I am able to be friends with people who believe differently from me. You guys know that. I spoke with somebody who was a very strict Catholic. And they know me very well. That it's not an anti-Catholic thing or an anti-friend thing. But I made the comment, I would have trouble going to a pedophile priest and asking that priest to forgive my sin. Personally, I would have trouble. Can you tell me anything that will make me feel better about it? And my friend said, yes. Now I'll share this with you. You may want to accept it. You may not want to accept it. I'll just give it to you. It seems to fit here. He said it's like in the army. If you're married, if you're made a sergeant, you have certain authority over privates and corporals. Now, I'll add to that and say this. You know, all the people running around in cops' uniforms, you know, not every one of them is a real nice person. Most are, but not every one. But if a black and white car pulls up and he's wearing a uniform and he's got a badge, it doesn't make any difference if he's a nice person or not a nice person. He has the authority of the agency that has hired him, and you better respect that authority. And when he says stop your car, turn off your lights, and show me your driver's license, you better do it. Not because of him, but because he wears a badge of authority. Now that's as close, and I don't think it's a 100% satisfactory subject or answer, but that is as close as I could come as explaining this to you. God says to the king, you almost did a boo-boo, but I warned you. So now give the man back his wife. Be nice to him, and he will pray for you. You know, I'm just as human as anybody else. I probably would have said, him pray for me? He lied to me. But sometimes we have to back away from a subject a little bit and look at it with more than one pair of glasses on. If you don't return her, you will die, and those who are yours will die also. Early in the morning, Abimelech gets up, he calls all his servants together, and he personally tells them everything God told him. Then Abimelech calls Abraham in and he says, "What have you done to us? How did I sin against you? What did I do to make you mad that you did this to me? I was nice to you, and you lie about this being your sister instead of being your wife. And you brought enormous guilt upon me and my kingdom." See, somebody can be mad at our president and do something terrible to our president, and then we as Americans may suffer from that. We don't always suffer because of what we do. Sometimes we suffer because of wrongdoing of other people. Abraham said, "I thought there's absolutely no fear of God in this place. You guys aren't good Christians. They would kill me because of my wife. Since they don't respect God, they see a beautiful woman. She's my wife. They'll kill me, and then she's a free woman. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So she's my wife, but she's my sister. So when God had me wander from my father's home, I said to her, 'Honey, show me your loyalty. If you love me, tell this lie for me. Wherever we go, say he's my brother.' And then Abimelech took sheep and cattle, male and female slaves, servants, but in those days, property, so the word slaves is used. Give them to Abraham and return Sarah to him. Abimelech says, 'Look, my land is before you. Settle wherever you want. Everything you see is mine. Decide where you want to live. Have at it.' And then he said to Sarah, 'Look, I'm giving your brother slash husband 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a verification of your honor. That's proof I never touched you. To all who are with you, you are vindicated.' She didn't lie, Abraham did. So she's vindicated. And Abraham prayed to God. The authority, the spiritual authority before Moses was with who? The patriarch, the oldest male in the family. Abraham was an example. Job was another example. For the Lord had completely closed all the wombs in Abimelech's household on account of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Their wealth was in their cattle and their land and their children. And nobody in Abimelech's kingdom was having babies. Now we come to the birth of Isaac. And it's only a couple of verses, and I'm going to read them, and I'm going to stop there. If I didn't stop there, we would get into some very lengthy studies. Hagar, Abraham's wife's maiden that he had the child Ishmael with is sent away. After that happens, we have one of the great stories of faith in the entire Bible. It also has to do with end time prophecy. Believe it or not, we talk about a place. In those days, the land, the real estate, the ground on which they all stood was known as Moriah. Now we know it as, I wrote an article about it, or a video about it a while back, the Temple Mount. I have some new information about the Temple Mount that I haven't had time to make clear, so I'm holding it up till a couple of days till I have time to get you the pictures and the scriptures I want to give you for it. But I have something really interesting to tell you about the Temple Mount that I haven't heard anybody else explain. I don't know why, but I don't want to get into all of that. So as soon as we talk about the birth of Isaac, I'm going to end for tonight. Isaac, Abraham's son with Sarah. The Lord came to Sarah, as he said. Remember the last time we hear about Abraham and Sarah? Those 3 men / angels have come to Abraham's house, and he gives them wine and bread and curds and lots of protein. And they say she's going to have a child, and within a year when we come back, she'll have a baby. And Sarah hears it and laughs. That's the last we heard about it. This is the next we hear. It's a year now. The Lord came to Sarah and did what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. Well, her old age too. I'm 4.5 years from being 90. And I ain't ready to have no baby. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age and hers. At the appointed time, God told him. The one Sarah bore to him, Isaac. When his son was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded. We had that a couple chapters ago. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God made me laugh, and everybody who hears will laugh with me. She said, who would have told Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Today is 11. Yeah, this is not writing. Let me get something that writes. 11:23. This doesn't write. I need to get a wastebasket in here where I can throw away these things that don't write. Let me try another drawer. Oh, I got a bunch of stuff in there. 11:23:16, Wednesday p.m. Next Wednesday, Lord willing, Hagar, the Egyptian concubine, and the son she has with Abraham are sent away, and there's a promise of making a nation of him. And they are brothers, and they will fight in the future. And Abraham's children, we call them Israelites. If they're born of Sarah. If they're born of Hagar, we call them Arabs slash, not all, Muslims. And they're brothers. And they each, he had other children besides these two. We'll get to that later. Just a simple comment that he had them, nothing terribly outstanding, but he did have other children. However, Sarah, his half-sister, was the wife of promise. And that's where we're going to end. Let me turn this off and we'll chat a little bit if we have anything to say. Until the next video, everybody, we've been exactly 1 hour. Blessings on you.